Welcome to the podcast series, Ascendem, brought to you by Heidelberg University's Graduate School for Humanities and Social Sciences. Tune in for thought-provoking interviews with experts in different fields, from the social sciences to the humanities, from law to economics. Hello and welcome to the HGGS podcast series, Ascendem. Today, we are going to talk about the topic of the Girih mode in context, in experience, and in practice, toward a cognitive ecology of Islamic ornament in contemporary architectural design. Today, we will explore how a single pattern can be approached in strikingly different ways across methodologies and historical periods. As we encounter innovative approaches to examining the multifaceted relationship between the artwork and its observer, we will also be prompted to consider our own ways of seeing and engaging with art and architecture. To guide this exploration and to cultivate new perspectives on how we perceive and contemplate artistic forms, we have chosen to focus on a particularly rich and intricate tradition, the Girih mode within Islamic ornament. This distinctive geometric language will accompany us throughout today's journey, offering a lens through which to connect past and present, theory and practice. To help us navigate these interdisciplinary perspectives on the Girih mode in both art history and contemporary architectural design, we are delighted to welcome a distinguished guest to our studio. Bahar Akgün from the Islamic Studies Department within the Faculty of Philosophy at Heidelberg University. Welcome, Bahar.
Hi, Sinan. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a great opportunity to have such a platform to share the research. Thank you.
And we are glad that you are here, and we would like to start with asking your academic background.
Yes, I think I can say that I have a very interdisciplinary background. So I studied architecture and civil engineering as my bachelor's. I did double major, and then I continued with design computing at the Faculty of Architecture as my master's studies. And then between my master's and my current PhD research, I spent some years working as research assistant at the Faculty of Architecture and working in different research projects and practicing architecture a little bit.
Well, it's such a switch from the architecture and civil engineering to social sciences or the humanities, actually, and we will be learning more about that. But first, I'd like to ask you then, because your research builds on a long academic trajectory that can be traced back nearly a decade, and also that is related with my question, how would you describe this journey and what initially motivated you to focus on the topic of the Girih mode?
Yes, as you said, the dissertation is the outcome of a long journey whose foundations were laid, I think I can say that, nearly a decade ago. Even I can't believe that, but it is. During my master's studies, if I try to remember the beginning, my supervisor at the time, who is Mina Özkar, invited me to join her research project called A Computational Analysis of the Design Processes Behind Two-Dimensional Seljuk Geometric Patterns in Anatolia. Very long name, but it was the title of the research. So therefore, I spent some time looking at many different geometric patterns. But this particular one, a Seljuk Girih pattern, 13th century Tokat Mahperi Hatun Caravanserai, it was from there, from Turkey. That one captured my attention. So basically how the eye moves across it, how it traces certain paths, and this classic experience that unfolds between the very first moment the eye touches the picture plane, the surface, and the moment of loss of interest. At my supervisor's suggestion at the time, I began to narrate this experience in writing. So what I did was basically phenomenology, but I didn't know it at the time. And what started as a brief reflection actually developed into a full chapter in my master's thesis. And in the years that followed, it came to form the conceptual core of this PhD research. And the pattern that captured my attention belongs to the category known as the Girih mode of Islamic geometric ornament.
Actually, your research also starts with the statement that in recent decades, architecture has witnessed a renewed engagement with ornament. And you also refer to the Modernist suppression of ornament in art and design history. So I know that that's not really the focal point of your research, but maybe in order to shed light on the fundamentals of this topic, could you elaborate on the reasons behind this modernist suppression and how ornament later re-emerged in contemporary art and design?
Yes, I think if we try to create a very, very rough trajectory, there's this historical baseline. Ornament has always been central, from ancient to Islamic traditions to Renaissance, as a way of meaning making and communication. And then if we come to the modernist suppression part, I don't know if it's the right term, but you use it because I use it in my dissertation with this phrase. So there was this reaction against decoration as bourgeois, as superficial. There was a shift toward function, transparency, honesty of structure, so to speak. So we could say, I guess, modernist architecture therefore rejected ornament in favor of transparency, sincerity, they say it, honesty of structure, and a direct expression of function. And the key figures, one can mention Adolf Loos, like a primary figure in modern architecture, had this influential essay on ornament, and he was claiming ornament as unnecessary, even as a crime. For Loos, ornament had lost its social function in modern society and became unnecessary. This paradigm dominated architecture and urban design well into the 1960s. A critique of this approach was formulated in the decade that followed, which brings us to postmodernism, so the postmodern critique. Very briefly, like Robert Venturi and Dennis Scott Brown criticized this modernist paradigm as reductive and cynical and dull, even advocating decor and symbolism in place of transparency. But this postmodern critique actually lacked a stable shared language and remained a bit context-dependent, unstable. So it wasn't really a comeback moment for ornament. And then we can talk about the contemporary re-emergence of ornament today. And in recent years, the international field of contemporary architecture has witnessed a vigorous proliferation of projects engaging with ornament. We could name Jean Nouvel's Paris Philharmonic, or his Louvre, Abu Dhabi, or like Herzog de Meuron, their project, the Young Museum in San Francisco, for example, could be given as examples of this international projects, architectural projects, which has ornament, contemporary ornament. And one of the defining characteristics of contemporary ornament is its use as a continuous surface treatment, frequently extending across the entire facade. This renewed engagement, we could say it this way, I guess, departs fundamentally from the culturally coded languages of ornament known from earlier periods. And this contemporary ornament is closely tied, so this return is closely tied to advancements in digital design and fabrication technologies. New engagements with surface, pattern, and affect are shaping its characteristics.
Well, it's amazing to learn that actually there was this tension between maybe the function in pragmatic term of the ornaments and also the aesthetic value, I would say, of the ornaments. So maybe not only in terms of this tension, but also in other, I would say, perspectives, we also observe that there are shifting definitions and functions of the ornament. So how should we interpret these paradigmatic changes, particularly in relation to the evolving relationship between visual resonance and representation?
Yes, historically, ornament was often understood as something that represents meaning, symbolic or cultural references. So over time, especially in contemporary practice, contemporary architectural practice, this shifts toward understanding ornament as something that produces visual resonance. So meaning how it structures perception, movements, and experience rather than what it represents. And within current architectural discourse, affect has emerged as a central concept through which contemporary ornament is defined. And architectural historian Vittoria Di Palma puts it beautifully. And she talks about, unlike earlier notions of affect, which understood architectural experience of ornament as a one-way communication from object to viewer. Affect describes a distributed field of interaction between human and non-human agents, which is a bit in line with this worldview of quantum mechanics. So contemporary ornament is increasingly understood not primarily as a symbolic or representational device, but as a medium that generates sensory experience and affect. At the same time, other accounts emphasize that affect is never culturally neutral. The ways materials, colors, and patterns produce and communicate affect are always shaped by historical and cultural contexts. Within contemporary architecture, especially under conditions of globalization and digital design technologies, the question of meaning remains central to the debates on ornament. And this research, my research, positions Girih mode as a visual design language in which symbolic meaning and affects are co-produced through the intentional orchestration of visual experience. So I somehow position it including both the symbolic meaning and affect. I mean, this is how it's positioned. I just use that position.
Yeah, it's fair to say that one actually doesn't exclude the other one. Like effect does not have to actually exclude the visual meaning or what the symbol is representing, so that we can also take into account both of the factors when we are actually observing or contemplating an ornament.
Yes, I mean, it's also related to the way of seeing behind that specific ornament. So it could be designed in relation to effect. It could have been designed in relation to affect. So I guess there are different ornaments. And I argue, based on the literature, that Girih is more under this affect. And so does the contemporary architectural ornament, so that I create a connection between two. Although one is from today, the other is from 11th, 9th, 10th century.
Yeah, I understand. And getting more specific about the topic of your research, you have examined the concept of Islamic geometric ornament. Actually, Girih mode is a part of or an example of Islamic geometric ornament. So I'd like to ask then, what are the defining characteristics of this form and how does it differ from other types of ornament or from the related categories of ornament?
Yes, I will try to answer this. I mean, of course, I read so much on this, but maybe it's fair to say that I'm not a specialist on the topic. But in order to conduct this interdisciplinary research, I, of course, read a lot. So my take on this, I could say, I guess, this Islamic geometric ornaments, so refers to a tradition of pattern making based on geometric construction, symmetry, and repetition. So its defining features include the use of polygons, star patterns, interlaced lines, and tessellations arranged according to precise mathematical principles. What makes this form of ornament distinctive is its highly abstract nature and the visual complexity that it delivers. At the same time, Islamic geometric ornament differs from other geometric traditions through the sophistication of its proportional systems and mathematical systems and its close integration with architecture, craftsmanship, and intellectual culture of its time.
Well, as in the case of the ornament, actually, Islamic geometric ornament also has been understood and interpreted across various artistic and cultural paradigms differently. So how do these paradigms approach and interpret it, and how do you engage with or critically assess these interpretations, of course, within the framework of your research?
Yeah, among the earliest serious attempts to define the Islamic ornament was that of art historian Alois Regel, who in Stilfragen traced its gradual evolution from Hellenic naturalism to Islamic abstraction. Subsequent scholarship often interpreted the Islamic ornament as an autonomous formal development, largely detached from questions of meaning, a view shaped in part by the limited documentation available to 19th and early 20th century publications. A second major approach emerged in a wave of studies that foregrounded the religio, spiritual, and cosmological symbolism of the Islamic geometric ornament. For example, Louis Massignon's works could be given example to this category. these studies later described by contemporary scholars as essentialist and ahistorical. Of course, there are many views, but when I say later described, there is some who describe this that way, and it's a bit maybe too detailed. Just to be fair, these interpretations often overlooked the archaeological and historical evidence available at the time. So in response to these, a new line of research sought to reintroduce a historically grounded analysis of ornaments, tracing the long trajectory that led to the Islamic ornament. These studies rejected the idea that ornament was primarily rooted in theological or intellectual discourse. And for example, Terry Allen's 5 essays on Islamic art could be a reference to that. In contemporary scholarship, a further shift has taken place, which I find very exciting. Recent studies emphasize the deep interconnections between the mathematical sciences, philosophy, theology, and the practical arts in the medieval Islamic world. Within this intellectually receptive milieu, the Girih is understood not as an isolated formal development, but as a visual language shaped by and in dialogue with broader intellectual and theological currents. We can name many studies, but I guess Girih Necipoğlu's Topkapı Scroll is something we have to mention. And then there is Wendy Shaw, what is Islamic art? And then Avinoam Shalem or Margaret Graves. We can name many people under this category of contemporary scholarship. So I built my research on this growing body of scholarship in Islamic material culture that adopts contextually grounded and epistemologically sensitive frameworks. While Girih has often been treated primarily as a formal development within the disciplines of artistry and aesthetics, with the help of this scholarship, I could approach Girih mode as a product of a broader constellation of theological, philosophical, and artistic currents that unfolded between the 9th and 11th centuries. Recent scholarship increasingly challenges the conventional boundaries of artistry by drawing on disciplines such as philosophy, theology, and literature. For example, poetry, which wouldn't be necessarily a traditional source in academia. While this interdisciplinary approach has sometimes been met with skepticism, it also opens new possibilities for rethinking the Islamic art as a category, which I find so valuable. Given that these disciplinary boundaries stem from the 19th and early 20th century invention of Islamic art as a subfield of artistry, a construct long criticized for its methodology and repeatedly called into question, one may argue that it is precisely the interdisciplinarity of recent scholarship that holds the potential to enable such a reevaluation. And my research situates itself within the space of reevaluation. What interests me most is not the verification of historical knowledge alone within these studies, because sometimes archaeological records are not enough, but the ability of contemporary scholarship to connect historical material with contemporary aesthetic discussions, thereby opening a space for contemporary observers, whether scholars or non-specialists, to articulate and interpret their own encounters with this material. So this space of reevaluation is epistemically liberating and especially significant for scholars who have grown up within the cultural geographies from which this historical material originates, as it enables to engage with it both scholarly and through the lived, embodied connections that earlier disciplinary frameworks neither recognized nor accommodated.
As you have explained, actually, the Girih mode and the evaluation or examination of the Girih mode in various different disciplines is the focal point of your research. But maybe for listeners who may not be familiar with this concept, Girih mode, how might they visualize or understand the Girih mode, and where can they find actually representative examples of it?
Yeah, when you talk about it as Girih mode, people usually can't imagine anything. That will be the case for me 7, 8 years ago. I didn't know that that specific pattern was under the category of Girih mode.
But you knew it, right? I mean, you recognize it, but you didn't know that in which category that belongs.
Yes, and there is a debate if it's called Girih mode, if it's called something else. Yeah, so it's a whole thing. But yeah, the Girih mode is characterized by interlaced star and polygon patterns derived from underlying grids selectively retained or erased to produce the final design. It can manifest in both 2 and 3-dimensional forms, and the Girih mode creates a novel vocabulary, a novel formal vocabulary that became somehow emblematic of Islamic geometric aesthetics. And I'm sure almost anyone who's listening to this must have seen it somewhere. So one way to visualize it is to imagine a network of lines generating complex stars, polygons, and interwoven bands, strips that appear highly ordered and endlessly extendable. So representative examples can be found across the architecture of the Islamic world, of course. For example, particularly in monuments from Iran, Central Asia, and Anatolia. Yeah, well-known examples would include, for example, I cannot name it right now, but Isfahan is definitely the city, and also Alhambra in Granada, and Seljuk architectural ornaments in Konya and Sivas. And also, we can trace that the prominence of pattern in contemporary ornaments often echoes Islamic geometric ornament, both formally and conceptually. In the literature, these resonances are attributed to shared geometric foundations. The compatibility between parametric design and historical generative methods, and a similarly reconfigured subject-object relationship. Building on the theoretical foundation from recent scholarship that I've just mentioned, the research then reframes Girih as a historically grounded design language that speaks directly to contemporary concerns and positions Girih not merely as a formal precedent, but as a methodological analog for designing affect today. One central question that I asked in my research, what can Girih teach contemporary ornament production about designing affect intentionally rather than incidentally?
Mm-hmm. And based on your findings, you are also trying to develop a methodological framework for analyzing the Girih mode. So how would you describe these methodology, or what would you describe as the core pillars of this framework?
Yes, a central contribution, if there's any contribution of this thesis, I think I could name this a central contribution of this thesis, lies in the methodological framework that it develops for approaching the Girih mode. Contemporary scholarship repeatedly identifies distinctive perceptual modalities associated with Islamic art, for example, scrutinizing gaze, kinetic gaze, contemplative gaze, performative gaze. One could find in literature like terms that function as theoretical descriptors of this specific effect in the literature. So I focused on one such modality, which is the contemplative gaze, through first a phenomenological lens, which was my narration that I described in the beginning of my own experience. So beginning with introspective analysis and extending to participant-based inquiry in order to elucidate how this mode of gazing, in my case, the contemplative gaze I picked, is lived, structured, and expressed in experience. So I identified some correspondences between theoretical descriptions of the specific effect and their experiential manifestations, offered valuable indications how such phenomena could be brought into the domain of empirical investigation, which form the design and conduct of an eye-tracking study in order to understand the visual experience of others. So I experience this, and I find correspondences in the literature, and how about the others? How do they experience it? So building on these indications, the thesis developed a methodological framework that enables this perceptual phenomenon, until now addressed only in historical and theoretical terms within Islamic art scholarship, to be examined empirically. Within this methodological framework, phenomenology functions as a means of translating theoretical insight into empirically examinable form. A defining feature of this experimental methodology is its treatment of stimulus, in our case the Girih pattern, not as geometric pattern in general, but as a deliberately designed visual construct that embeds within a structure its own mode of seeing. And in our case, again, the contemplative gaze. In order to investigate this perceptual phenomenon, sorry, I keep saying perceptual phenomenon in order to remind that it's a perceptual phenomenon, but I could simply say contemplative gaze now, more systematically. So in order to investigate it more systematically, as I said, I designed and conducted an eye tracking study. The outcomes of the analysis gave me an initial understanding of how certain aspects of the geometric pattern were correlated or not correlated with other aspects of the geometric pattern. And the complexity of the pattern led participants, for example, to prioritize certain feature over others, and being able to understand this kind of relationship and this continuous perceptual shifting between reduction and reconstruction that I could follow through eye tracking. I argue like these results that I accumulated could be a mechanism through which the contemplative gaze acquires its mesmerizing and absorptive character described in the literature.
Right, as you have mentioned about this first phenomenology and then the eye tracking studies, I think it's fair to say that one of the distinctive features of your research is that it's not only trying to fill a gap in the literature in terms of its content, but also it's unique in terms of its interdisciplinary aspects, because you have mentioned that your study is situated at the intersection of Islamic studies, art history, aesthetics, cognitive science, and architectural history. And you describe your approach as examining the Girih mode, as I'm quoting from your research, in context, in experience, and in practice. So that sounds really interesting and also highly demanding. I'd like to first, in this framework of methodology, ask then, could you elaborate on how you integrated these disciplines and how they contributed to a more comprehensive understanding of your topic?
Thank you for touching briefly on the demanding aspect. Yes, it was definitely demanding, but rewarding too, I guess. This is a very good question. I enjoyed trying to answering it. And I was like thinking of a way to put this complex interaction that I try to design between disciplines. So how to put this in the most simple way. And I thought, I guess, just giving the framework of the chapters of my dissertation would do it naturally. So the thesis, my dissertation is structured in 5 chapters. And the chapters 2, 3, and 4, so 3 chapters of it, constitute the core body of the thesis. The first and the last is introduction and conclusion. And this chapter 2, so one of those core chapters, provides a theoretical basis for the thesis by tracing the historical, philosophical, and aesthetic foundations of the Girih mode through a historically grounded conceptual analysis at the intersection of Islamic studies, art history, and aesthetics. It establishes a framework within which Girih can be examined, discussed, and interpreted using the methods and vocabulary of contemporary aesthetics, which was my aim. So trying to create a theoretical framework for me in order to connect the theory behind these patterns with the contemporary aesthetics terminology. Which brings us to the 3rd chapter. The theoretical insights developed in chapter 2 are extended into an empirical investigation in chapter 3, drawing on this time phenomenology, empirical aesthetics, and cognitive sciences. The chapter examines how the Girih mode operates in visual experience, establishing continuity between historical aesthetic thought and the contemporary observer's perceptual engagement with it. And the chapter 4 builds on the theoretical and empirical foundations established in the preceding chapters and drawing on architectural theory and design computation, situates the Girih mode within contemporary debates on ornament. So this chapter proposes a methodological framework, as I mentioned, that translates the perceptual dynamics revealed in Chapter 3 into operative design parameters, enabling historical aesthetic principles of Girih to inform computational and parametric design approaches to contemporary architectural ornament.
Another innovative aspect of your research is that you have worked with 4 supervising professors from different academic backgrounds. I think that could be regarded both as a necessity, but also a demanding, I would say, journey in terms of communicating with all these professors. But I'm probably thinking that that was also a rewarding experience for you because you had 4 different perspectives while you were working on this research project. So how did this collaborative and interdisciplinary supervision shape and enrich your research?
Yeah, I cannot imagine doing such research without having 4 supervisors. So none of them was like secondary. They were all very, very primary because, I guess because of all the obvious reasons that I just said, like just even this trying to describe the chapters, I guess one can easily think, okay, like this person really needs some supervisors. But I guess the most important thing here is maybe to talk a little bit about what Islamic studies actually cover. Because when I said Islamic studies, people understand different things because it's a very broad and interdisciplinary discipline in itself. It studies societies and geographies which was influenced by the religion of Islam to different degrees. And the subject of the study can be philosophy, can be history, can be literature, politics, language, culture, you name it. What was important for me when like a study from this discipline looks at art or architecture, it often asks questions about meaning, intellectual traditions, spirituality, cultural contexts, or historical worldview, as opposed to artistry focuses specifically on visual and material culture as a discipline, but it's more concerned with questions of style, form, visual analysis, historical development, authorship. And with all my concerns in relation to Girih, Islamic studies were giving me the necessary perspective in order to approach this phenomena more holistically. So that was a base, therefore, Islamic studies. And I worked with Rebecca Zauer from Islamic Studies and Material Culture from University of Zurich. She was my main supervisor. The entire methodology brought this translation of my very search for the visual experience of Girih mode into the methodological frameworks of psychology. And I have no background in psychology. So I needed supervision definitely from psychology. So I had Rebecca Chamberlain from Psychology of the Arts, Neuroaesthetics and Creativity from Goldsmiths, and Andreas Voss from Department of Psychology from University of Heidelberg on board. And without their help, I don't know how I will do this. And also Professor Brigitte Zoll from Architectural and Modern Artistry from University of Heidelberg was my 4th supervisor. There is no 4th second, actually. I have a main supervisor, but they all operated as supervisor, which I find very important in relation to interdisciplinary research, because traditionally you would have one supervisor and the second one you would only see at the jury. But if you're doing an interdisciplinary research, that's not the case. So you have many primary, basically, supervisors. And when you operate in another discipline, your main supervisor wouldn't be even knowing what you're doing. So it's just for the bureaucratical reasons that you have a main supervisor. Otherwise, for interdisciplinary research, it's so essential that you have many primary supervisors so that you get the validation from a specific discipline that you're trying to operate in. Yeah, and I guess also I have to mention Anna Brinkman, Danube University Krems. She supervised me conducting the eye tracking research and unofficially supervised me. I also have to mention her, as so many other people also unofficially supervised process. And the actual working of it was a constant dialogue with supervisors and this translation of one idea to another and trying to learn the terminologies of different disciplines trying to stick with the research question, trying not to forget the research question while doing the translation was the biggest challenge, I guess, conducting the interdisciplinary research, because sometimes when you switch from one discipline to another, trying to think what you're trying to do with the terminologies of another discipline, your research question changes itself and you cannot recognize your research question anymore. So there is a big chance that you get lost somewhere there. And without the correct supervision, it's, I think, impossible, and so important there. You get the help, you get the supervision, which is needed. Yeah, I think I can go on with how this was conducted forever, because it was a process, I tell you. But I guess, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience and also this wonderful topic of your research with us. And I have prepared 2 questions in order to also give you an opportunity to share your personal reflections. And the first question is about, actually, you have also mentioned about these experiences that you had engaging with different topics, engaging with interdisciplinary research, and also working with 4 different professors from different academic backgrounds. And you are sharing your experience as you have recently conducted a workshop at Heidelberg Graduate School for Humanities and Social Sciences on designing and conducting interdisciplinary research. So based on your experience, what are the most common challenges in conducting interdisciplinary research in your field, and what strategies would you recommend for overcoming them?
Yes, I gave this workshop yesterday, so my insights are so fresh. I don't know if they've turned into something meaningful yet, but I will try to reflect on it. I mean, when I wanted to do this workshop, I knew that I gathered some experience which might be valuable to some. The extent of it, of course, could be debated, but I suspected that I might have some things to share, but yesterday was a validation of it, and I got very happy because conducting this interdisciplinary research, I've been fortunate that I've been exposed to some environments that I felt, okay, there are other people like me, but not so much. Conducting interdisciplinary research, this isolation comes with the territory, I guess. You're always this person who are on the boundaries and doing this boundary work, never have a home, metaphorically, I'm saying. And yesterday, just designing and conducting a workshop on interdisciplinarity with people who are trying to deal with this issue was very liberating. It was really nice, to honor difficulties of this process and everything, and trying to draw on literature on interdisciplinary research, design of interdisciplinary research, how it's designed, how it's conducted, how it finds a place for itself under the roof of institutions, which is a challenge in itself. Yeah, I guess I felt so many key points emerged, but I guess one thing I felt like the participants really like to talk about, this feeling of not having a home. I think psychologically very heavy, and having these kind of environments and trying to learn the literature, the key concepts in relation to interdisciplinary research, I guess somehow makes people feel like, oh, maybe I have a home, which is a good feeling always. Yeah, and we were also talking about this, how this epistemological pluralism, which is very essential to interdisciplinary research, because if you're working in an interdisciplinary way, I guess you work with many different epistemologies, and different disciplines have different epistemologies, languages, and validation criteria. So you're constantly translating between disciplines, you're aligning things, which is cognitively loaded work, which should be acknowledged by your supervisors, by institutions. Even financially, it should be recognized that it requires much, much more time than monodisciplinary research. Of course, this doesn't apply to every interdisciplinary research, but I'm talking with broader terms here. And like creating spaces for people who are working in interdisciplinary research where they can learn more about theoretical frameworks, which could help them to create their own theoretical frameworks, because this is something usually left up to you, up to your skills or up to your enthusiasm, which can be a bit too much while trying to do it. But if there were, courses which is introducing the very basics, because there is a whole literature out there, but somehow I guess it's a bit demanding also for institutions to deal with this complex way of doing research, which requires more money, which requires more time, which requires more of everything. So I guess it becomes very easily secondary. But we know when things get complicated, when problems get complicated, you have to work in an interdisciplinary way. We could be talking about the climate change, health, urban systems, but also, for example, in my case, the complexity were coming from established disciplines facing limits and not enabling certain questions to be studied in academia. There was a complexity that I was faced with, and I know that's also the type of complexity many interdisciplinary researchers choose to work this way because of this reason. And this established disciplines, traditional frameworks cannot adequately account for certain domains. Which takes us to problem-driven research design, which is a different way of conducting research. And there is so much to say about this, I guess, which would form another workshop. So I will not do that. I will stop here. Yeah.
But in a joking manner, I would like to also ask, do you have any recommendations when people are conducting research in an interdisciplinary field? They are also struggling with coming up with shorter titles for their researches, because I'm also trying to start an interdisciplinary project, but I also realize that the title just goes on and on, and you cannot just cut any part of it. So maybe I'm just asking it as a fun question, of course, but yeah.
I mean, if your only problem is the title, you're very lucky.
That's right.
Because if you're doing interdisciplinary research, probably you will have some other concerns. Right. But I don't know if of course, I wouldn't like to put myself in a position as if, I've done a wonderful interdisciplinary research. But as someone who has some experience in interdisciplinary research, not claiming that, I killed it, I understood what interdisciplinary research is. Not from there, but more from someone who's experienced the difficulties and also rewarding parts of interdisciplinary research. I think it is so essential that you collaborate with people. I think interdisciplinary research is not something you can do by yourself. This collaboration can take very different forms. This collaboration can take the form of supervision. You can have different supervisors, and your relationship could be creating the way you're being supervised could be creating this collaboration. But you could also be doing different research visits, for example, in different parts of the world, in different labs, in whatever you need to learn, you go there and learn it. And this could be a way of getting help, being exposed to an environment that specific thing is actually being performed. And you position yourself in a way, okay, I will be there, I will be exposed to that, I will learn from it, and then I will feel entitled to say, okay, I can do this can be done, or this can't be done. So I think being creative in terms of what kind of collaboration your research needs is very important, because there's always this danger that you think or you want to conduct an interdisciplinary research, but all you're doing in the end is taking inspiration from another discipline. So, and there are also other forms of doing research which is not monodisciplinary, so to speak. There is this multidisciplinary research, which is different than interdisciplinary research. There is this transdisciplinary research, which is different than interdisciplinary research. So if you are working in an interdisciplinary way, so you are talking about disciplines and you are talking about their being you're going between, but trans means something else. So I think it's also important to understand what kind of research you're actually doing. So if you are a bit concerned about the limits of certain discipline, you might be needing something. So There are so many questions there, I guess. So I really think collaboration is important. Getting help is important. Somehow acknowledging what kind of expertise I need in order to conduct this research in the way that I want to conduct in 2 years, in 3 years, because we have time limits. So we could work everything in a perfectly interdisciplinary way, working on it 100 years with thousands of people. So it's so important that how much time I have, how I can collaborate, and how I can do it in the most effective way. But creativity is very important there, I guess. And also, somehow, some different ways of thinking could help. For example, systems thinking, right? This understanding phenomena as interconnected systems, identifying relationships rather than isolated variables. I think it's the very core of interdisciplinary thinking. And there are pioneers in almost every discipline who apply systems thinking to their own disciplines. For example, in architecture, that will be Buckminster-Fuller is synergetics, applying systems thinking. So telling Buckminster-Fuller work is interdisciplinary is like his work is everything. It's even more than that. But it's interdisciplinary research could sound as if something new, but it's so not new. And it's the very core of doing research. So there may be an understanding of what is discipline, how they've been formed, what are the other knowledge systems in the world, and how they're known to the disciplines that we know and how they're not known, what validates a certain way of knowledge, what does not. I think understanding the borders and understanding where you position within those borders are so important because you have to have an overall understanding of, okay, I'm working in boundaries because you may choose not to do research outside of academia. Then we'll be talking about something else, I guess. So there are these other forms of knowledge that you could position yourself. Yeah, I guess there's epistemological pluralism, systems thinking, collaboration, the acknowledgement of the complexity and how you deal with the complexity. Yeah, I could, I guess, say these.
Those insights are really important for the researchers who are going to conduct interdisciplinary research. And one of the things that I noticed was also that sometimes interdisciplinary fields are declaring their independency as they also create their own methodology and also then they create their own language so that this interdisciplinary field would not also be considered as an interdisciplinary field anymore, but rather a field which has its own language and methodology so that we consider it as a different field right now. So not an interdisciplinary field, but a field as from that point on. And lastly, I'd like to ask, would you be willing to share your upcoming academic and personal plans?
Yes, that will be a very nice excuse to think about it. Yeah, I really want to continue working on this research because, as you said, interdisciplinary research needs to create its own methodology. Sometimes even that is the outcome, so that you create a dialogue, a unique dialogue, which hasn't been created before, which would be very helpful for people coming after you. So it's also like in terms of evaluation of your work, it requires a different perspective, a different approach, because what interdisciplinary research basically creates is its theoretical and methodological framework. So that's the number one outcome. And then the outcome of that methodology, of course, that also applied to my case. I needed to create the theoretical framework. How is the translation going to take place? Like what kind of translation we're talking about? And what this translation leads to is an entire thing in my dissertation. And then when I finally got the theoretical framework, when I finally got the methodological framework, it was already very end of the 4 years. And I needed to get a little bit, like do at least some analysis in order to see the initial results since I did an empirical research. And then that was the end. So right now I'm left with this with this methodological framework, which is so fertile, like which is ready for it to be used. And there is a whole data waiting to be analyzed more. So I feel like this thing wants to go in the direction of a postdoc naturally. but as someone who is a bit thinking of the next steps as listening whatever is needed, it could be in the form of something else. But I think I would like to take it up where I left off, and we'll see in which form it's gonna be done, I guess. But I think I can say this is not something I'm thinking right now, as opposed to what I've just done. The dream of this research is one day, this is a dream. I mean, I guess I don't have to make any explanations around this. So since it's a dream, it's okay that it's ambitious. I would really like to turn this entire inquiry into a lab one day. And I can really imagine people from which disciplines should be there. I think whoever has been listening so far also can imagine like which people would be there, what kind of interaction between them, because that will be the ultimate point that research could come. And then there is this whole craftsmanship waiting to be discovered. And with the technologies available right now, and with the needs of the meaning and the theory and architectural production today, so I can see how that machine would be running. So I guess that will be the ultimate goal of this research.
Well, designing it in your mind is the first step to actually walk along this road. So we wish you all the best in your future research endeavors, both maybe in academic and also personal life. And we are also closing this episode. And if you liked our episodes, please don't forget to check our latest episodes. And Bahar Akgün and I are saying goodbye to you.
Goodbye. Thank you so much for having me.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening to the HGGS podcast series, Ascendem. In this series, we bring you conversations with experts from a wide range of disciplines, from the social sciences to the humanities, from law to economics. If you enjoyed our podcast, we invite you to explore our previous episodes and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new episode. Stay tuned for more insightful interviews coming soon.